Derrick thought his bank was doing well until he visited one in disguise and found a scared employee being mistreated by her manager. Derrick Lawson worked his whole life to become a bank CEO. He started as a part-time teller in college, working long hours with difficult customers while studying. He understood what it was like to work at the counter, to worry about making ends meet. That's why, even after becoming the boss of Ashford National Bank, he didn't just sit in a fancy office making decisions based on reports and numbers. Spreadsheets didn't show what was really happening in the branches. The real story was in the break rooms, the quiet talks between workers, and the tired sighs at the end of a long day. So every few months, Derrick went undercover. No suit, no title, just a regular customer walking into his own banks. Usually he found small problems, but sometimes he saw things that worried him deeply. Tonight, he chose a small branch in Columbus, Ohio. The report showed it was doing fine. Good profits, happy customers. On paper, everything looked normal. Derrick walked in, wearing a casual blue button-down shirt and jeans, looking like any customer stopping by after work. The bank was quiet in the early evening, with just a few customers finishing up before heading home. The lights were too bright, the air conditioning too cold. At the counter, tellers handled money with the skill of people who had done it thousands of times. A middle-aged man in front of Derrick struggled with his card, trying to explain something to the young woman teller, who smiled politely but seemed tense. Derrick noticed a manager in a gray suit, watching everyone closely. Something about how he stood seemed controlling, not just observant. Then Derrick heard it, a soft, muffled sound from the hallway. When the customer in front of him moved on, the sound became clearer. Someone was crying. Not loudly, but the quiet kind of crying that happens when you're trying not to fall apart. Derrick turned slightly and saw through a partly open break room door a young woman with her head down, gripping the table edge like she was barely holding herself together. Another employee stood beside her, talking quietly. Derrick didn't know her, but her look of pain hit him hard. Something was very wrong. Derrick decided he wasn't leaving until he found out what. He waited in line, but his mind was on the crying woman. This wasn't just frustration, it was real pain. He'd seen workers overwhelmed by busy days or annoyed by difficult customers, but this was deeper. He wanted to ask if she was okay. But right now, he wasn't Derrick Lawson, the CEO. He was just another customer. Instead, he listened to the young man trying to comfort her. He caught bits of their conversation. "Jasmine, you can't let him. He doesn't own you." Jasmine's voice was almost a whisper, but Derrick heard the defeat. "What choice do I have? He's already made it clear if I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Derrick's jaw tightened. His first thought was maybe a customer had been rude to her. But what she said, "If I don't do what he says," that wasn't about a customer. That was about someone inside the bank. Then the teller called him. "Sir, I can help you over here." Derrick walked up, smiling politely. The young man, Kenny according to his name tag, looked fresh out of college. "How's your day going?" Derrick asked casually. Kenny hesitated for just a second, barely noticeable, but Derrick caught it. "It's been good," Kenny said, forcing a smile. "How can I help you today?" Derrick pulled out a deposit slip he always carried for these undercover visits. "Just need to make a deposit." Kenny took the slip and entered the account number. But Derrick could see how tense he was, how his fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. He was distracted, on edge. Derrick glanced at the manager at the back of the bank, the one always watching. His eyes flicked toward the break room just for a second. Kenny must have noticed Derrick looking because he suddenly spoke up, lowering his voice. "Do you work in banking?" Derrick raised an eyebrow. "What makes you ask?" Kenny hesitated, then shrugged. "You just seem like you've been in a branch before." Derrick smiled. "Yeah, I used to be a teller a long time ago." Something in Kenny's face changed, like he felt relieved, but also unsure, like he wanted to say something, but wasn't certain if he should. Derrick gave him a moment, but Kenny glanced over his shoulder at the manager, and the moment passed. Kenny slid the receipt across the counter. "Here you go, sir. Anything else I can help with?" Derrick took the receipt, but wasn't done here. "No, I'm good," he said, pocketing it. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "But take care of yourself, Kenny." Kenny stiffened just for a second, but Derrick noticed. He stepped away from the counter, heading toward the exit, but he had no intention of leaving. Instead, he stopped near the loan officer's desk and pretended to check his phone. From here, he could perfectly see the break room. Jasmine had wiped her face and was sitting up straight, but her hands still shook in her lap. The young man beside her was speaking urgently, shaking his head, but she wouldn't look at him. Then Derrick saw it. The manager, Mr. Stiff Posture, walking toward them with slow, calculated steps, like a predator approaching prey. As soon as Jasmine saw him, her whole body tensed. She quickly grabbed her phone, stuffed it in her pocket, and stood up like she'd been caught doing something wrong. The manager said something Derrick couldn't hear, but Jasmine gave the smallest nod, then walked past him with her head down and returned to the teller stations. Derrick wasn't sure what he'd just seen, but one thing was clear. Whatever was happening here wasn't good, and he wasn't walking away. Derrick watched as Jasmine returned to work, moving stiffly and mechanically. She forced a smile at the next customer, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was on autopilot, just trying to get through the day. The manager stayed near the break room door, arms crossed, watching. Derrick recognized this kind of toxic workplace. Employees who flinched when their boss walked by. Conversations that stopped when certain people entered the room. The unspoken tension in the air. Not obvious, but there if you knew where to look. He had a choice. Leave and handle this from corporate, investigating from a distance, or get answers now. Derrick took a deep breath and looked for an opening. Kenny was helping another customer. Jasmine was back at her station, avoiding eye contact with the manager. But the young man who had been in the break room with her was standing near the side counter, organizing deposit slips, his jaw tight. Derrick walked over, keeping his voice casual. "Excuse me, do you have a pen?" The young man looked up, startled. "Oh, yeah, of course." He grabbed one from a cup and handed it over. Derrick took it, but didn't walk away. He glanced at the employee's name tag. Miles. "Hey, Miles," Derrick said quietly. "I couldn't help but notice your friend seems upset." Miles's expression didn't change, but his grip on the papers tightened. "She's fine." Derrick tilted his head. "She doesn't look fine." Miles swallowed, eyes darting toward the manager, who was now near the back office. Then he exhaled, like he was deciding whether to trust Derrick. "She's not fine," he admitted, barely above a whisper. Derrick leaned in slightly. "Is it a customer issue?" Miles hesitated, and that pause told Derrick everything. "No," Miles muttered. It's her personal business." That was a lie. Not because Miles wanted to mislead him, but because he was afraid. Derrick could see it in how he kept his voice low and how his eyes kept checking where the manager was. "How long has she been working here?" Derrick asked casually. "A little over a year," Miles answered automatically, then tensed. "Why?" Derrick shrugged. "Just wondering if she likes it here." Miles let out a humorless laugh. She doesn't, but she can't afford to leave. And there it was. The real problem. Jasmine wasn't just unhappy or stressed. She was trapped. Derrick's gut tightened. He'd seen this before, where employees felt stuck because of money problems, personal struggles, or worse, fear. Before he could ask anything else, Miles stiffened. The manager was walking toward them. The feeling in the room changed instantly. "Everything okay over here?" the manager asked, voice smooth but firm. Miles immediately looked down, busying himself with papers. "Yes, sir. Just helping a customer." Derrick turned, finally facing the man up close. Mid-40s, crisp suit, sharp features, eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was someone who knew exactly how much control he had and enjoyed it. The name tag on his jacket read, Ron Halverson. "Can I help you with something?" Halverson asked, tone polite, but with an edge. Derrick walked steadily across the lobby. He didn't stop at the counter, didn't hesitate. He went straight for Jasmine. She was talking with a customer, her voice mechanical, her hands steady, but her eyes looked empty. She saw Derrick approach and tensed slightly, like she expected trouble. "Excuse me," Derrick said, just loud enough for the customer to hear. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Jasmine blinked, confused. I'm with a customer, sir." The older woman in front of her gave Derrick a sharp look. "She's helping me right now. You can wait." But Derrick kept his eyes on Jasmine. "It's important." And she knew. She swallowed, apologized to the customer, and stepped away from the counter. Halverson noticed immediately. Derrick saw him straighten up, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like losing control. Jasmine led Derrick a few steps away, fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. What can I help you with, sir?" Derrick took a slow breath. Now was the moment. "I know what's happening," he said quietly. "You don't have to say anything. I just need you to know you're not alone." Jasmine flinched. For a second, just a second, she looked like she might break, but she didn't. She shook her head, smiling tightly. "I don't know what you mean." Derrick wasn't giving up. "Halverson, the late shifts, the way he treats you. I know it's not okay." Jasmine's fingers curled into fists. This was fear. She thought there were no options left. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Derrick said firmly. "And you will, because I promise you, he's not untouchable." That's when Halverson walked over. "Is there a problem here?" he asked smoothly, eyes moving between them. Derrick turned to him, keeping his face neutral. "Just having a conversation." Halverson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Jasmine has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private discussions." Jasmine froze at the word private. Derrick didn't miss it. "Actually," Derrick said, "I think we should have a conversation right now." Halverson's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Derrick didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing his executive ID badge from Ashford National Bank. Jasmine gasped. Miles, from across the room, stared in shock. Halverson's face went completely blank. "My name is Derrick Lawson," he said steadily, "Chief Executive Officer of this bank, and you and I need to talk." The entire room fell silent. Halverson blinked rapidly, his mouth opening, then closing. For the first time, he looked nervous. "Sir, I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't," Derrick said, stepping closer. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Jasmine took a shaky breath, looking between them, still processing what was happening. Derrick turned to her, voice gentle. "You're safe now." And this time, she believed him. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Jasmine stood frozen, her breath uneven. Miles, Kenny, and the rest of the employees had stopped what they were doing, watching Derrick and Halverson. Customers whispered among themselves, sensing something big was happening. But Derrick didn't break eye contact with Halverson. "You and I need to talk in your office," Derrick said firmly. Halverson opened his mouth, then shut it. He was trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. Sir, Halverson stammered. "I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. If you'd just give me a moment to—" Derrick didn't move, didn't blink. "Your office." Now Halverson swallowed hard, his confidence cracking. He turned stiffly and led the way toward his office. Derrick followed, but before stepping inside, he turned back to Jasmine. "Stay here," he said gently. "This won't take long." Jasmine barely nodded, her hands trembling at her sides. Derrick stepped inside the office and closed the door behind him. Halverson took a seat at his desk, trying to pull himself together. He let out a forced laugh, shaking his head. "I have to say, sir, I didn't expect to see you here tonight. A bit unusual for the CEO to visit a branch without notice." Derrick leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "You know what else is unusual," he said quietly. "A branch manager abusing his power to intimidate his employees." Halverson flinched. I know what you've been doing," Derrick interrupted. "I know about the late-night shifts. I know about the way you treat Jasmine. And I know you think you can get away with it." Halverson went pale. "Sir, I assure you, I have always conducted myself professionally. If there have been any misunderstandings—" "Save it," Derrick snapped. He wasn't here for excuses. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a single tap, he played back a recording. Jasmine's voice, raw and shaken, came through the speaker. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Then Miles's hushed response. "Jasmine, you can't let him. He doesn't own you." The color drained from Halverson's face. "You should have known better," Derrick said coldly. "You've been playing this game for a long time, haven't you? Preying on the employees who need this job the most, making them feel trapped. But let me be very clear. You just ran out of time." Halverson's hands trembled. "Please, I can explain." Derrick straightened up. "No, you can't." He pulled out his phone again, this time dialing corporate HR. "You're done," Derrick said simply. "You will never work in this industry again." Halverson sat there, frozen, as Derrick stepped toward the door. His power was gone, and Derrick wasn't done yet. When Derrick walked out of the office, the tension in the lobby was thick. Jasmine, Miles, Kenny, everyone was waiting. Derrick took a breath, then looked directly at Jasmine. "He's gone," he said softly. "You're safe." Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching. Disbelief, relief. Then for the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed. Miles let out a slow exhale. Kenny looked stunned. Other employees exchanged glances, as if they weren't sure whether to believe what they just witnessed. But Derrick knew this wasn't the end. He turned to the team. "You've all been working under someone who didn't deserve his position. That changes now." Jasmine wiped at her eyes, swallowing hard. "What happens next?" Derrick gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You tell me." Jasmine stared at Derrick, processing his words. "You tell me." For the first time in over a year, she felt something unfamiliar. Control. She glanced at Miles, who was still in shock, and then at Kenny, who gave a small, hesitant nod. They were all waiting for her to speak. Jasmine took a shaky breath. I don't want anyone else to go through this. Not here, not anywhere." Derrick nodded. "And they won't." He turned to the rest of the employees. From now on, this branch is under direct review. We'll be making changes, not just replacing Halverson, but making sure no one else like him gets this kind of power again." The room was quiet, but the weight of his words settled in. Then Miles spoke up. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but this isn't just about Halverson." Derrick's gaze sharpened. "Go on." Miles hesitated, but then he took a step forward. His voice was stronger now. "The way things work here, it's not just one bad manager. The pressure, the way we're treated, the fear of speaking up. It's bigger than just this branch." Kenny nodded in agreement. "A lot of us feel like we have no choice but to put up with it, because the second we complain, we're out of a job." Jasmine looked down, guilt on her face. "I wanted to leave so many times," she admitted, "but I couldn't afford to. And I thought maybe this was normal." Derrick's jaw tightened. This was why he went undercover. Not because of numbers or performance reviews, but because the real problems were hidden beneath the surface. He took a deep breath. "This stops today." Everyone watched him, waiting for what came next. "I don't just want to fix this branch, I want to fix the system. And I'll need your help to do that. That means transparency. That means trust. That means if something is wrong, you speak up." Jasmine still looked uncertain. "And if we do, will anyone actually listen?" Derrick met her eyes. "I will." Jasmine studied him for a long moment. Then finally, she nodded. For the first time that night, she looked like she believed it. An hour later, Derrick sat in his car, watching the employees slowly lock up for the night. Jasmine walked out with Miles and Kenny, the three of them talking quietly. They looked lighter, like the weight of the last year had finally started to lift. Derrick exhaled, running a hand over his face. This had been one branch, one manager, one location. But how many more were out there? How many employees just like Jasmine were afraid to speak up? How many times had he looked at a spreadsheet and thought everything was fine when it wasn't? Being a leader wasn't just about profit margins or efficiency. It was about people. And tonight, he had been reminded of exactly why he did this job. Too often, people in power look the other way. They see employees as numbers, not human beings. But leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. If you ever feel trapped in a situation where someone is abusing their power, speak up. And if you see someone else struggling, don't stay silent. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to break the cycle. And if this story resonated with you, share it. You never know who might need to hear it.